Real stories of werewolves, of dogmen from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
10 different werewolf legends according to Fate Magaizne. Welcome to Scary Stories. Recently I came across a book from around a dozen years back that the old Fate Magazine had put out. It was called Fate Presents Werewolves and Dogmen. It's mainly by the late Rosemary Ellen Guiley, but it has chapters by Loren Coleman, the late Brad Steiger, and other luminaries of paranormal publishing. There's a chapter where John Keel's friend Brad Steiger interviews Linda Godfrey, the author of the Beast of Bray Road book that sort of rebooted Dogman into the popular zeitgeist. I checked this Fate Magazine book out, and as you can imagine, it had a lot of interesting stuff in it. There's one section in which they list off some creatures that they consider werewolves or werewolf-related. Some of them are more like vampires or zombies when looked at from a modern perspective, though. I narrowed the list down to 10 kinds of creatures, which I think most of us would still put in the shapeshifter category today, including werewolves. I'm going to go through these in alphabetical order for the most part, but it feels like I should start off with the most famous of the creatures on the list, no matter where that one falls in the alphabet. And of course, when you're talking about different kinds of werewolves here in the United States, you're always going to find this first type of critter way up near the top of the list. So number 1 is the lugaru or the rugaru. The lugaru or the rugaru came from the French culture into the Americas. Up in Canada, the term lugaru is used, with the term lou of course meaning wolf, and garu being a derivation of an older French word garoul, which meant werewolf in that archaic version of the language. Interesting how close it is to the English word growl, which is certainly what a werewolf is reported to do. If you go back in history, you see French people who came over to America settling in the Louisiana area and creating their own dialect different from any other place on the planet. Down there in the New Orleans area, lugaru got corrupted down to the slang term rugaru, but it means essentially the same thing, which is an intelligent werewolf. I'm betting that most of you out there listening to this probably know as much or more about the lugaru and the rugaru as I do. Rosemary Ellen Guiley's Glossary of Werewolves has a take on the rugaru that's a bit different from any that I've ever heard before, though. In her blurb on the legends surrounding the lugaru, she tells us that a lugaru who gets injured while transformed will instantly revert back to its human form. The person who injured the lugaru, however, that person now becomes the lugaru instead, and they have to remain a lugaru for 101 days. If they tell anyone what's happened to them, then they become the lugaru permanently. So this is a shameful thing, and it needs to be kept secret. If you're a lugaru and you don't want to be, keep your mouth shut, and try to write it out. If you tell even one other person about it, then you'll never be human again. Unless someone injures you, of course, then you revert to human form and the other person must remain a lugaru for 101 days. Unless they tell someone about it, or unless someone injures them. And in those cases, well, you get my point. Have you ever heard that interpretation of a lugaru before? It's a new one on me. Please let me know in the comments how you define a rugaru. I'd like to understand better how you guys see all this. Now that we've spoken about the lugaru, let's go back to the beginning of the alphabet, where we find our next shapeshifter, namely, number 2, Buda, the Ethiopian hyena man. In ancient Ethiopia, talented potters and ironworkers were regarded with such respect and awe that many felt they had the power of the evil eye. That is, the power to end your life just by looking at you. In addition, these craftsmen were regarded as so mysterious by the regular folk that people even said they had the ability to shapeshift into werewolves and other half-human, half-animal creatures. When they did this, they were called a Buddha, but not in the sense of Buddha the wise teacher. In English, this Buddha is generally spelled B-U-D-A and tends to be represented visually as a sort of hyena-headed wolfman, or a hyena man. Buddhas wore unique earrings which were said to be found sometimes in the ears of trapped hyenas. One major difference between the Buddha and any other kind of shapeshifter I'm aware of is that the Buddha only transformed one day each year. Number 3. The luru. Similar in many ways to the rugaru, the luru was a Frenchman afflicted with some kind of transformational disease which he had no control over. This is a very old legend, and you can tell that in a couple of distinct ways. First of all, it was said that you were more likely to become a luru if your parents were unmarried. Second of all, when the illness or possession overtook you, then you would jump out of the window of your cottage, run to the nearest water well, leap inside, and have yourself a meeting with the devil himself. Noting that you were a luru, Satan would grant you a free goat skin. Then you would climb out of that well, become a hellish goatman, and roam the countryside eating dogs. I'm not sure why dogs, but the legend is specific about that. The hellish goatman beast would swallow entire limbs whole, like a snake or something. And when it became human again, well, I don't want to gross you out if you're eating dinner, but let's just say nothing that was eaten was very well digested. Now, in werewolf lore, you become harder to kill when you're the beastman. Not so in luru lore. In fact, if you got injured in any way by a human while in the goatman form, you would immediately turn back into yourself, be recognized, and bring down shame, not just on yourself, but on your entire family. This is not a creature you really want to be transformed into. Yeah, the luru is among the creepiest, most disgusting, and most overly complicated of all the shapeshifter legends, to be certain. Number 4. The oborot, the Russian tree stabber. In Russia, in the old days, it was said that you could choose to transform yourself into a werewolf, a specific kind of werewolf, called an oborot. The first step was to go into the woods and find a tree that had been cut down and left lying there. Now, I'm not sure why someone would cut a tree down in the woods, unless he was planning on using that wood for something, so I'm a bit confused right off the bat. Maybe there were mad woodsmen in Russia back in the old days. In any case, let's say you found yourself a nice tree trunk chopped down in the middle of the woods. What do you do next? Well, you take out your trusty copper knife, right? And you stab that fallen tree trunk with the copper knife. Then you walk around the tree, reciting an incantation. I'll read you Fate's translation or part of it, but I imagine that it probably rhymed back in the original Russian. So here is some of it. On the sea, on the ocean, on the island, on Bujan, on the empty pasture gleams the moon. Moon, moon, gold-horned moon, check the flight of bullets, blunt the hunter's knives, break the shepherd's cudgels, cast wild fear upon all cattle, on men, on all creeping things, that they may not catch the grey wolf, that they may not rend his warm skin. My word is binding, more binding than sleep, more binding than the promise of a hero. Then after you finish reciting that, you jump over the fallen tree 3 times. If you're not a werewolf by this point, I don't know what to tell you. But if it works and you find yourself transformed, you are then free to run off into the woods and, do the werewolf thing. Number 5. The ruenes, the Romany werewolf. The American interpretation of the werewolf was writ large in the 1940 Lon Chaney Jr. movie The Wolfman, and the Romany or Gypsy people were part of the legend right from the start. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that there is in fact a werewolf in the Romany legend or lore. It's called a ruenes, and in fact it's a lot like how we now see a werewolf. It's a human that transforms into a ravenous beast, often because they have been enchanted by a witch, or perhaps because they themselves are a witch. Fate tells us a ruenes story from the late 1800s and claims it is true. I'm unclear what their documentation is on this one, and I think in fact this might be a good subject for me to base a future episode on, if I can dig up anything more on this case. Here's a summation of the version Fate gives in this book, which we'll have to do for today. Remember, they claim this is true, There was a poor fiddler named Kropan. He was a real man. He existed in history and was not fiction. Kropan was married to a woman named Torej. So far these seem to be documented facts, but it gets crazy super fast, so I hope you have your seatbelts buckled. Okay, Kropan the husband started noticing that when he would wake up in the night, sometimes his wife Torej would be missing. Needless to say, he began to suspect he was being cheated on. He tried to stay awake and follow his wife when she left the cottage in the night, but she would easily lose him in the woods every time. Finally, one morning, Kropan caught sight of Torej returning home. She was in werewolf form, and she was bringing with her an animal she had taken down. Kropan watched his wife return to human form and began butchering the meat for their lunch and dinner. Now, Kropan remained silent, unsure of what he should do about any of this. He was a poor fiddler. He could barely afford bread, which along with eggs, was throughout human history traditionally the cheapest food in the world for poor people to subsist on, until about 3 years ago. His wife was bringing him free meat. He wasn't sure he should actually complain about that. In fact, Torej brought home so much meat that Kropan started selling the meat that they couldn't eat themselves. Soon the couple was not poor any longer. Kropan opened a restaurant and inn, selling meals at a cheaper price than anyone else could afford to sell them. Things went well for a while, but a werewolf left unchecked will get increasingly greedy, and soon the villagers began to accuse the couple of being monsters. Here's where the story sort of goes off the rails, and I wonder what really happened. So this is allegedly a historical set of events. It's just that what is supposed to have happened to Kropan and Torej doesn't really sound possible to me. According to Fate, a priest performed an exorcism on the couple. When he splashed holy water on Torej, she is said to have screamed and, disappeared. Yeah, really. So whatever happened to Torej, the villagers pounced upon Kropan, and they ended him. This part is historical fact, because 2 men judged to have been ringleaders in ending the life of Kropan were in fact imprisoned and later released in 1881. This is a matter of historical record. To me, it kind of seems like maybe some other businessmen got angry at the success of Kropan and his inn, and maybe they concocted a story of werewolfism in order to get rid of their competition. It does seem to be true, sadly, that in every single era, those who can't actually compete will just accuse their opponents of terrible things, instead of offering people a better choice. Number 6. The Vilkasis. In Latvian or Lithuanian lore, a male werewolf is a Vilkasis or Vilkasis, and a female werewolf is a Vilkatis or Vilkatis. They have different ways of becoming a werewolf. In fact, the males seem to have 5 different ways of making it happen. First, you can use astral projection to leave your body and run with the wolves. Now, that's not tangible enough for you. Then you can try being cursed and physically transforming into a werewolf. If that seems a tad extreme, you could try committing some sins. That might turn you into a werewolf, but it might also get you cursed. The 4th way would be to don a wolf skin and recite incantations or charms and try to change yourself by yourself. If all those fail, the 5th and final way that Fate informs us that a man can become a Vilkasis werewolf is for you to venture out into the woods and find yourself a tree whose top branches have somehow curved back and grown back down into the ground, forming an archway. Now, I'm not sure, has that ever happened in nature? Is that a common thing in Lithuania? At any rate, if you can actually find such a tree, stand in the natural archway it creates, and you may turn yourself into a Latvian werewolf. But not if you're female. If you're a Lithuanian lady looking to become a lycanthrope, what you're going to have to do is take off all your clothes. Hey, this isn't me saying it, it's the late Rosemary Ellen Guiley, okay? She says you take your clothes off and you hide them. And then, you are a Vilkatis or a Lithuanian werewolf. Please note I have no illustration for this part of the story. By the way, ladies, if anyone finds your clothes while you're the werewolf, and if they so much as touch them, then you will be cursed to remain in wolf form for as long as 9 years. So hide them outfits well, my friends. Number 7. The Wacalac. The Wacalac is a West Slavic werewolf. And it seems that the Wacalac was mainly known from one famous folktale about a Wacalac who had 9 daughters. All the daughters were kind and cared for the father, none of them understanding that he was a werewolf, except for the youngest one, who was the smartest. The Wacalac went into the woods with an axe and began to chop wood. Concerned for him, the kind but unintelligent daughters went into the woods one by one to bring their father some food. Well, the evil Wacalac werewolf ate their meals all right, and then he chopped up the girls, roasting them for food as well. Each daughter, one by one, meets the same fate until the youngest one arrives and pushes her evil, murderous father into the pit her sisters had already been thrown into. The werewolf then chases his own daughter through the woods furiously. She hides in some haystacks, and while the wolf tears them apart looking for her, she makes her escape. Soon a king is hunting in those same woods that she's hiding in. Finding he loves her at once, the king marries the Wacalac's daughter. The couple are happy for years, and they have 2 sons together. One night, years later, the Wacalac figures that his daughter has married the king. Jealous and vengeful, he convinces the castle guards that he is a poor beggar, and they allow him to sleep in a corner of the castle for the night. Under the cover of darkness, the Wacalac sneaks in and ends the lives of his own royal grandsons. Heartbroken and furious, the king kicks his queen out of the castle, into the woods where he first found her. There she meets a beggar, who shows her a lizard with curative powers. The queen uses these powers to bring her sons back to life, and then the king forgives her and takes her back. Once again, the evil Wacalac hears that his daughter is happy, and once again he wants to ruin everything for her. He goes to the castle and tries the same trick as last time, but this time the guards recognize and remember him. He's brought before the king, where he confesses to all his crimes. The king orders him punished, but the local DA lets him off and he oh no wait, that didn't happen. What happened was the king had the werewolf tied to a wagon, see? Then he had the wagon brought to the top of a tall cliff, see? And you could probably guess what happened next to that wagon and to the Wacalac werewolf. And as you might have also guessed, the king, the queen, and their reanimated sons lived happily ever after. At number 8, the Vloko-Slack. Not the Wacalac, the Vloko-Slack. We are now talking about Serbian werewolves who are also vampires. They like to gather in the woods in winter. Sometimes they take their wolf skins off, and then they really party. If anyone finds their skins while they're off and burns them, the Vloko-Slacks will all become normal men once again. Number 9, the lacas. Okay, since it seems that a lot of the werewolf mythology derives from older vampire mythology, sometimes these same terms over centuries kind of come to mean variations on each other, at least during different periods. In this case, the Greek term lacas is one of these words. It's actually the oldest Greek word meaning vampire, and yet it was handed down from an earlier Bulgarian term vacalac, which in fact means werewolf. So lacas might be vampires or they might be werewolves, depending on the period and the storyteller. But one thing is for certain, if you are a lacas werewolf in life, then you are certain to return as a lacas vampire after death. And now, our final werewolf type of the world according to Fate Magazine's book, number 10, the wacalac. The wacalac is a white Russian werewolf who became the way he is because he angered the devil himself. I'm not sure we have any corresponding myths to this in the West. It's a pretty distinctly Russian legend. I'm not sure what a Russian man had to do in those days to make Satan mad, but once they did, they would find themselves transformed into a wolf, but still possessing their own mind. Their family would recognize them and would attempt to care for the wacalac, but the poor cursed soul was forced to live according to his now wolfen nature. As a consequence, he would shun the safety provided by his loved ones and leave to go wander the woods, living the life of a wild animal, always on the go, always facing the danger of being done away with by your new worst enemies, the human race you had once belonged to. So, that's it. Like I said, I left some out that were really just vampires or zombies, but I find it interesting how all three legends seem to have always been tied to each other, going way back into prehistory. If you would like to get your hands on this book, it is still around on the interwebs and you can still buy it. If you use the link we've provided in the description of this video, then you can also help this channel out while you're doing so. Speaking about helping the channel out, that's what our executive producer tonight certainly did. Please join us in thanking Sabrina Midkiff for donating to this channel using the handy thanks button located under each of our YouTube videos. That money goes directly to food and necessities, trust me, especially these days. Sabrina, if you would like to get links to some of our secret uncensored episodes, email us at our scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com and we'll send them back to you. You can also become a channel member and get access to fun perks, like the 4 secret shows we dropped in 4 days in a row last week. Here to explain more about all that is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.